evening, everybody. Welcome to another you can tell it's live because I just choked on my own water. Live episode of The Breakdown. It's been a minute, as the kids say, but we got us a show tonight. We got some things we got to talk about. It's with The Breakdown's 50th episode of the year. I don't know how many we've done. It's been 6 years. Someone should probably check that. He looks over to the person doing the button things. Whether or not we have an answer for that, I don't know. But it's been quite the year so far. And so, having taken a little bit of a break for the summer, one of the things that we wanted to do coming back is to maybe look at a few things, maybe look at a few things that everybody should maybe be paying a little bit more attention to as we head into the next legislative session. For everybody who's as nerdy as we are here, you're probably aware there's another legislative session coming up right away. It starts at the beginning of October. It is immediately only days, followed by Daniel Smith's leadership review within the UCP party. Some things we want to make sure everybody pays a little bit of attention to. So there's some things we're going to be trying to dive into a little bit farther through our next few shows as well. We're trying to get a couple of interviews lined up. But after we're done, all of our summer in review, if you will, we're going to open it up for our open mic, our speakers corner as well. So if you're watching live, if you're listening to the podcast version, you won't be able to join. It won't work for you. But if you're watching live or if you're listening live on the Twitter Spaces, all you have to do is hop on over to Twitter Spaces. And once we get through our roundup, you can raise your little hand on your mobile device. Has to be a mobile device. Can't be a laptop because technology is hard, apparently. So we'll open it up to the floor if anybody has anything that they want to say, anything that they want to correct, because we got a lot that we're going to talk about. And we're going to start tonight by talking about the thing that's on so many parents and kids' minds, parents especially, probably more than a few parents out there are like, hooray, the kids are going back to school. Probably some kids are saying, hooray, we're going back to school. But there's a really important question. There's a really important conversation to be had around what does going back to school look like? What is that going to look like in the province of Alberta in 2024? And the answer is, from outward appearances, not super great. So to start with, there have been cuts to teachers across the province from the ATA's or the Alberta Teacher Association's press release on June 19th, 2024. 24 of Alberta school district divisions will have less teachers next year, despite a significant increase in school enrollment. A scan of publicly available school board budgets reports for 2024-2025 shows that province-wide more than 250 teacher positions are being eliminated, with one board cutting over 15% of its teaching staff. The quote from Jason Schilling, ATA president: "We cannot be cutting staff in our growing school divisions when schools province-wide are expected to receive 26,000 additional students next year. The government made an election promise to hire 3,000 new education workers over the next 3 years. Cutting teacher positions now fails our students and their learning." 26,000 new students, more than there were before, entering the education system. This is wild. And it's really important to highlight going into this year's school year that it's not like teachers have had it super easy. We've had multiple conversations over the last few months, last few years with teachers talking about the fact that the reality is teachers are burning out at an incredibly alarming rate. They're leaving the profession at an incredibly alarming rate. And this is not good. This is fundamentally bad for the province of Alberta, and it's fundamentally bad for kids in Alberta. It's really not good. The administrative burden, and we're going to talk more about that later when we get to one of our last topics, the administrative burden that's being placed on teachers takes away from their time to teach kids. Now, there's a lot of people who say, but teachers, they had the summer off. Well, they didn't. And if you understand anything about how teachers gets paid, that's not how any of it works. So There's that first piece. But if we're going to talk about dollars, we're going to talk about the sense of how much the province of Alberta has been spending on education. The only way to really get a good picture is to compare it against other provinces in Canada. And when we do that, we're literally the worst. So, according to this graph from the Alberta Teachers Association, that's not the right graph. I'll just read it. According to a graph from the Alberta Teachers Association, Alberta ranks last in education spending. Now, these numbers are based on per student operating expenditures for 2020-2021, which are the most recent available numbers Canada-wide. The average money spent per student in Canada is $13,332. The highest province, the province that pays the most, that provides the most funding per student, is actually Quebec at $15,116, down second from there, Manitoba with $14,281, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador, Ontario, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and in dead last place, the province of Alberta, $11,601, almost $2,000 less than the national average on how much funding goes towards students. So not only are we wildly underfunding students, but we're also creating environments in classrooms that are profoundly not good for teachers. What am I talking about when I say that? Well, let's take a look at what we know about class sizes. Now, it's important to realize that when we're talking about what we know about class sizes, the UCP actually dismantled all of the apparatus that required school boards to report how many kids they had in classrooms. So it's an incomplete picture. But what we do know isn't good. Also from the Alberta Teachers Association, they have the clever new graph. 40 is the new 30. The most common class sizes in Alberta by grade level. These are the 2024 Alberta student class sizes, and it's juxtaposed with the recommended. So the recommended number of students to have in kindergarten through grade 3 is 17 kids per class. In Alberta, we average 20 to 25. From grades 4 to 6, the recommended number is 23. In Alberta, we average 25 to 30. From grades 7 through 9, which are arguably some of the more difficult years to teach kids. I'm not a teacher. I don't know. This is just what I hear. 25 kids is the recommended number of kids to have in a class. Alberta averages 30 to 35. But where it gets really horrifying is grades 10 to 12. The recommended number is 27. And in the province of Alberta, it averages 35 to 40. And they had to put a plus on it. They had to put a plus on it because there's class sizes in the grade 10 through 12 range that are more than 40 kids a student. And if you're thinking, where did those fancy numbers come from, those recommendations? They probably came from Quebec or maybe Ontario, probably Justin Trudeau. No, they're actually the Alberta Commission on Learning recommendations. These are Alberta's own recommendations, Alberta's own benchmarks for how many kids are supposed to be in a class. And we are blowing past them. In the 10 to 12, we're almost doubling the number of kids that the province of Alberta has recommended there should be in a classroom. It's almost as if the shortage of teachers and the underfunding of students has something to do with that. Now, we're looking to have some conversations over the coming weeks and coming months as the back-to-school dumpster fire gets settled a little bit to get a sense of what the obstacles are the teachers are facing, what they're seeing in the classrooms. All of that stuff is stuff that we're going to be drilling down again, as we try to do pretty much every year. But it's not great. It's not good. That's the first. We have like 5. That's the first topic that we are looking at. The next topic that we're going to be looking at and paying close attention to over the coming weeks and months has to do with the Alberta dumpster fire that is healthcare. Now, there's been a lot of media coverage. There's been a lot of news coverage about the state of Alberta healthcare. Just yesterday, last night, we put out a DM that we received where it was from a paramedic who was talking about the fact that they were at 50% of what their staffing levels were supposed to be on a Saturday night. And that meant that they were literally just dropping patients off at the triage desk at hospitals and getting back on the street because there were no ambulances available for a sustained period of time. Now, this is something that Danielle Smith had said she was going to fix. In fact, she said she was going to fix all of healthcare in just 90 days. And it's been 2 years. It's been almost 2 years that she's had to fix healthcare. And in fact, what she's doing is the exact opposite. She's disintegrating healthcare, as we've talked about a couple of times on the show in other episodes this year. Definitely worth going back and listening to. But the reality is, Danielle Smith has taken a healthcare system that was the envy of the world because it was an integrated system that reduced barriers. If somebody needed multiple services within the AHS behemoth, then it was easier for them to access those services because they were all in effect under one roof. Now, of course, no system is perfect, and of course, there are always problems and inefficiencies, and those can be addressed. But the way that Danielle Smith has chosen to address those problems is to say, well, hey, what if I broke healthcare up into a bunch of different pieces? What would be the effect of that? Well, we're going to take a look tonight in this segment at what has some of the effect of that been. And the truth is, the effect has been really bad. Because if we take a look at just the last week, we're talking about 1 week in emergency rooms. We pulled this off the interwebs today before the show. How many emergency rooms have been closed in the last week in the province of Alberta? Let's count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 emergency rooms in the last week. Now that's just emergency rooms. That's just emergency departments. If you want to see how disrupted the healthcare system actually is right now, 2 years after Danielle Smith said she would fix it in 90 days, there's another website that you can go to that shows you all of the areas in Alberta that are currently dealing with disruptions. Now, this is current. This is as of today. And it's really small font on our screen here because there are literally dozens of cities, towns that are having their healthcare currently disrupted. We've got Barrhead, Beaver Lodge, Boyle, Consort, Drumheller, Edmonton, Fairview, Grimshaw, Hanna, Hardisty, High Level, Lacrate, Lac La Biche, Manning, Peace River, Ponoka, Rimbey, Rocky Mountain House, Slave Lake, Smoky Lake, St. Paul, Stettler, Sundre, Swan Hills, Three Hills, Two Hills, all the hills, Wabaska, Wainwright, Westlock, and Whitecourt. Now, what's striking about this is a lot of people might take a look at that list and they might go, that's a whole lot of rural Alberta, though. And they voted for the UCP, so you get what you vote for. And there's a problem with that because, not everybody in rural Alberta voted for the UCP. I mean, the UCP got elected in rural constituencies. If they hadn't carried the rural constituencies as much as they did, they wouldn't have formed government. But not everybody in Alberta, especially rural Alberta, is a UCP supporter. And this is a really important distinction to make because it's very easy to go, well, hey, you know what? Consort or look great. Look great. I'm talking to you right now. There's like 5 people who probably didn't vote for the UCP there. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. But there's a lot of people who didn't vote for the UCP who are seeing their health care gutted in rural Alberta. They're seeing these emergency department closures, and they are seeing these healthcare shutdowns where healthcare is affected. But for all the big city folk who are like, rural Alberta, I'll remind you, Edmonton was on that list. I'll also remind you that this doesn't include, when we're talking about emergency departments, this doesn't include all the little sections of emergency departments that get shut down regularly inside of Calgary and inside of Edmonton. There's lots of reports of staffing shortages in Calgary and Edmonton, where because there's a shortage of nurses and physicians and in the emergency rooms, sections of the ER are closed. The ER remains open, but there's not as many beds available. And this is, as has been reported widely in media, a relatively common occurrence where, yes, the Foothills Hospital emergency department is open, but maybe one of the sections of the emergency department isn't open. Maybe one of the sections at the Peter Lougheed or at the Royal Alex, maybe those aren't open. And so there's some gray areas to be had because those numbers aren't as readily reported as the stuff that we just had up on the screen. But if you want to know whether or not all of this is affecting other places in the province, well, let's take a look at what's going on in Edmonton, because it absolutely does affect a lot of people, and especially a lot of the vulnerable and the elderly. When we're talking about the closure that was reported on that website, we're talking about a closure at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. We're talking about orthopedics. And this is a story that we've been following here at the Breakdown for quite some time, because back in the beginning of July, it was reported that there were going to be closures of surgeries in orthopedics at the Royal Alex Hospital. Well, those got bumped, and then they got bumped some more. And every week or two, there would be another announcement saying, "Hey, so about those orthopedic surgeries, fun story. We're gonna bump them down the road a little bit. It'll be fine." The start date was July 2nd, 2024. This is a reduction of scheduled orthopedic surgical cases, reassignment of OR time to other surgical services. So people who need hips, need knees, have not been able to get the orthopedic surgery that was scheduled for them because of a lack of staff. The reason that's given is temporary physician shortage due to illness, leave, vacation, vacancies. Again, this started on July 2nd, 2024. As of today, the anticipated end date, which is also the next date that they're going to update this website. So, there's that. September 1st, 2024. That is 2 months of orthopedic surgeries that have just been bumped. And there's been a lot of media coverage about this. There's been a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of reports as to what's causing this. And one of the things that's unquestionably causing this is the fact that with the chartered surgical facilities that have opened up across the province of Alberta, because Danielle Smith wanted to expand the number of chartered surgical facilities, these are the private, for-profit, but paid by the taxpayer, so it's okay, facilities that cherry pick the easiest of cases. So let's say you're, 48 years old and you need to get your knee replaced. You're otherwise healthy, you're fit, you don't have any other health problems, you don't have any asthma, you don't have any of the things that could potentially make your surgery complex. You can get into one of those chartered facilities super easy. But if you throw a couple of health complications in there, if you make yourself maybe a little bit elderly, if you give yourself a history of heart problems, any of those things, now all of a sudden you are considered to be a complex case. And those complex cases are the ones that the chartered facilities tend to cherry pick their way around. So the people for whom their quality of life might best be affected, and it might help some of those other health situations that they're dealing with, they're the ones who are having their surgeries bumped in the public system because so many of the staff are working in the private system, the chartered system. Chartered is just another nice word for private. And this should be cause for concern because it's not just chartered facilities that Danielle Smith is looking to expand. We've also done a couple of episodes on this fascinating little development coming out of Airdrie. The province of Alberta paid some physicians in Airdrie and some developers in Airdrie to put together a business case to run a private, for-profit, paid for by the taxpayers, expanded health clinic and urgent care facility in Airdrie. That's $85,000 of taxpayers' money to develop the business case. This is not those doctors coming forward and say, hey, we've got this business case we put together, and we think that maybe we should be able to do private emergency care in the province of Alberta, especially in Airdrie. Yeah, they totally need a hospital. But what if we did an urgent care and we did it privately and made money off of it, and y'all, the taxpayer, just paid for it? How would that sit with you? This isn't that. This is the province of Alberta saying, hey, what if we paid you to develop a business case, a business plan to build a private healthcare facility? Now, to be clear, what has been proposed, there's very little information about, but what has been made available about what's going on in Airdrie, or what's being pushed in Airdrie, I guess might be a better way to say it, is that it'll be a 2-story building. And the top story will be a private physician's office, just like any other physician's office, where they'll have a panel or a group of patients, and those people will go to see their family doctor on the second floor. That's fine. There's no major concerns that you can have with that, because doctors have patients, and getting more doctors' offices to provide more primary care isn't a bad thing. Where it gets sketchy is the main floor, because the main floor will be a private, for-profit urgent care facility. Now, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the difference between an urgent care and an emergency room tends to be attached to a hospital proper, and they have the ability to admit patients that need to be admitted. Sounds cool? That's most healthcare that we're familiar with. An urgent care has a lot of the same testing and abilities that a emergency room has, but they don't have the hospital chunk attached to them, so they can't admit patients. If patients need to be admitted, they then get transferred from that urgent care out to a hospital. So it's kind of the lower hanging fruit, if you will, of the healthcare. Now, they can't theoretically refuse people who come through their door, no matter what's going on with them. But it gets kind of questionable why it is that the government is spending almost $100,000 of taxpayers' money to build a business case to have private, for-profit emergency care in the city of Airdrie. That should give everybody a whole lot of pause, because that's taxpayers' dollars that are going to be in direct competition, in effect, with all of the other urgent cares and hospitals that taxpayers pay for. And it's pretty clear when we talk about the difference between private, for-profit care and publicly funded care, something's got to give. Because if you're going to say, I'm going to spend $100 on getting, I don't know, an x-ray. I don't know how much x-rays cost. Well, let's say they cost $100. I'm going to spend $100 on getting an x-ray. And the taxpayers are going to spend $100 on making sure that x-ray happens. If they have to spend $100 in the public system, then that's what an x-ray costs. But if they have to spend $100 in the private system, something's got to give. There's got to be something that gets cut. And the evidence is overwhelming. It tends to be the quality of care. Or people pay a little bit of an extra. And that's not how healthcare is supposed to work in Alberta or in Canada. So the introduction of private, for-profit, funded by taxpayers emergency care should give everybody serious pause. But that's not all that's going on, because one of the other things that Alberta has had to navigate is questions of physician pay. We're going to throw a couple of graphics up here from the Alberta Medical Association that show just how poorly physicians' pay has kept up to the cost of living and to the cost of inflation. A regular visit to a family physician would pay an additional $10.62 today if the fee kept pace with inflation since 2010. So the fee in 2024 is $43.08. That's what a physician is allowed to charge for a single healthcare visit. The graph on the right shows the difference between physicians' fees and Alberta inflation. Alberta inflation since 2010 has gone up 38.9%. Now, obviously, everybody feels that, but physician fees have only gone up 8.9%. So in a province that is trying to attract doctors, in a province that's trying to get doctors to come and play and take care of people and be primary care physicians, to not even be keeping up with inflation makes for a really difficult value proposition. But the UCP government likes to say, you know what? We introduced all of these new physicians. We had an increase of 332 physicians in the last year. We're doing great. We're bringing in all the doctors. But the problem is, as is outlined in a letter from Alberta Medical Association President Dr. Paul Parks to his membership, this is from July 24th, 2024, so just over a month ago. This week, the government issued a news release about data from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta that shows some improvement with a net increase of 332 physicians in the last year. Sounds good, right? The trouble is that we are starting from a deficit position. From 2019 to 2023, 2,471 physicians exited practice in Alberta. And we've seen unprecedented vacancies in family medicine residency spots and other specialties. All of this while our population continues to grow at a rapid rate. Alberta's population exploded by 200,000 people from April 23 to 2024. That's like adding the population of Red Deer twice to the province. And we expect to add nearly 2 million in the next 20 years. So the workload is increasing, and there have been small additions to doctors. That's good. The addition of physicians is good. But as Dr. Parks pointed out in his letter to his membership, is almost 3,000 short. So, 10% is a start. But maybe having a less adversarial tone with healthcare might go a long way in attracting more physicians. More on that in just a little bit. From there, this gets so gross. There's no other way to say it. This next little bit stings because one of the other stories that we're going to be following, keeping track on, is the situation in Grassy Mountain. Now, this is a saga and a half, and it goes on. This is the story that just refuses to die, as much as just about everybody probably wishes that it would. So we're talking about the coal mining that was being pursued by a company. The parent company is Hancock Prospecting. Now, they had a company that they brought into Alberta a little while ago called Benga Mining, and they were looking at reopening the Grassy Mountain mine to mine metallurgical coal. Now, I want to be clear. There is a not terrible argument for the need for metallurgical coal. There's, from what we've been told, there's really only two ways to make steel happen. I'm going to oversimplify. I'm sure there's going to be some people in the comments and in the Twitter who say, you got it all wrong. I'm oversimplifying. I'm acknowledging that out of the gates. But there's two ways to do it. One, you either have to use coal. Two, you have to use a lot of electricity. So you either have to have a surplus of electricity or you have to use burny things. And metallurgical coal is one of the things that's used to make steel. Steel is something that we need to make buildings and cars and all of those things. So there is an argument to be made that the world currently, without having the energy need, the electricity need that we need, I screwed that up. We don't have enough electricity. Without having that much electricity as a surplus, we still need, if we want to make things out of steel, to have something to make the steel happen. So there's an argument to be made for metallurgical coal. There are some questions as to where that metallurgical coal should be coming from. And there was a lot of public outcry when this proposal was put forward, because one of the concerns that people had was there was going to be a very high risk of leaching of bad things into the soil, the water table, ranch lands, all of those sorts of things. Primarily, one of the big chemicals people were concerned about was selenium, which in small doses, as has been pointed out by some of our very astute listeners, is actually needed for cattle. But those doses are really, really small. As with all things, the poison is in the quality and the dose. And when we're talking about the amount of selenium that would be potentially leached into all of the things in Alberta, we're talking about really high levels. This is one of the reasons why a joint committee from the province and the federal government stepped forward and said, "Oh, this is not going to be good," and they shut down the coal mining. From that decision, based on our assessment, we conclude that the project is likely to result in significant adverse environmental effects on surface water quality, West Slope cutthroat trout and their habitat, white bark pine, rough fescue grasslands, and vegetation species and community biodiversity. Although we identify other residual effects, we determined that they are not likely to be significant. We also find that the project is likely to contribute to existing significant adverse cumulative environmental effects on West Slope cutthroat trout, little brown bats, grizzly bears, and white bark pine. At the end of the day, we find that the project would result in the loss of lands for traditional activities, and this would affect Indigenous groups and their members who use the project area. We find that the project would result in low to moderate positive economic impacts on the regional economy, but Benga did not consider some of the risks that could reduce the magnitudes of those positive impacts. So they said no. The province and the federal government both said no. This project will cause more harm than it will cause good. Therefore, no. And that should have been the end of it. But Benga's run by Hancock. And Hancock's run by this Australian lady who really doesn't like to take no for an answer. She's literally the richest person in Australia. Not the richest woman, not she's the richest person. She has the most money of all of the peoples in Australia. She doesn't like to take no for an answer. And so we saw the resurrection of the proposal, compliments of largely the UCP government and Brian Jean. Brian Jean issued a statement to City News. Grassy Mountain has had a project summary and environmental impact assessment filed with the AR for several years before the 2022 ministerial order, which shut it down, and therefore qualifies and is advanced coal project. Now, Brian Jean isn't supposed to be able to say that. He's not supposed to be able to determine, as the Minister of Energy, he's not supposed to be interfering with the decisions of the AER. But there he is, issuing a statement saying, oh no, this is what it is. And he doubled down on it with a letter. And in that letter to the president of the CEO of the Alberta Energy Regulator, he made it very, very clear that it was considered to be an advanced coal project in his lawyerly opinion, and that it should be allowed to go forward. Now, this led to a lawsuit, in effect. The MD of Ranchlands appealed the decision to accept the coal exploration. So to be clear, what Northback was applying for wasn't to dig up the mountain all at once. What they were applying for was to dig a bunch of really big holes and use a bunch of water to determine where all of the coal was. Not that they're going to mine it. They didn't want to know that. They just wanted to know where it was, so you know where it is. Because sometimes you forget where you put a thing. And maybe they would still be. They were coal mining. They were doing the exploration so they could do coal mining. There's no way around that. They were trying to play on a technicality. And Brian Jean said they should be allowed to do that. Well, the MD of Rocky View stepped in and said, yeah, we're not so sure about that. And as it turns out, the MD of Rocky View, they just recently won a court case. August 22nd, 2024, the Alberta Court of Appeal will hear arguments from the MD of Ranchland that the province's energy regulator shouldn't have accepted applications for Grassy Mountain. So now it's before the courts in a really big way. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the courts rule. But there's some side effects that people probably need to be aware of. And this is one of the things that we're going to be trying to watch as best we can as well. Because the company, Northback, used to be Benga. Oh, we changed our name. Look, we're all new and fun now. Northback has been waging an incredible PR campaign in the area that is most likely to suffer all of those adverse effects the worst. They brought forward a lunch program, and they have been dumping money in huge ways into those communities. They announced for the Livingston Range School District, they announced that they were going to be bringing in a lunch program. And of course, who do we have at the corporate announcement that they're going to be bringing in this lunch program? None other than UCP MLA Chelsea Petrovich. But they're also dumping money into events in the area as well. In the Crow's Nest Pass, they redeveloped an entire golf course. And they've been holding ladies' nights and Christmas nights and family Easter brunches and all of those gosh golly good wholesome things in order to try to sway public opinion to get people more on side with the project. It's a pretty safe assumption. Maybe I'm being cynical here, but it's a pretty safe assumption that if Northback loses out on the decision to allow them to do the exploration, and they're effectively shut out of coal mining in that area, as they well should be, because of the environmental effects. If Northback does get shut out, it's kind of a stretch to believe that they're just going to continue dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars in goodwill PR campaign money into those surrounding communities. They're going to take their money and run. And that's going to negatively affect everybody who has benefited from their PR campaign. So it's much more complex on its face than it might initially look. But it actually gets more complex because just recently, the AER, this is back in April, the AER had a new board chair and several new board members appointed by Daniel Smith and the UCP. So again, AER is the organization that gets to determine whether or not projects go ahead. They're supposed to be the organization that determines what is an advanced project and what's not. And Daniel Smith just introduced 4 new board members. Now, it would be easy to look at that situation and go, don't paint it all with one brush. There's probably really good people on the AER board. There's probably really good people in those corridors of power that are looking out for the best interests of Albertans. It's not like one of the people that she appointed is, I don't know, the person who brought her into politics and encouraged her to be the leader of the Wild Rose. Oh, wait, yes, that's exactly what it is. Because one of the people that was brought in is a gentleman who we've talked about on the show a great deal, named David Yeager. This is the post that he put up a year ago on his LinkedIn. He's a LinkedIn person. I feel like that says a lot right there. Sorry, LinkedIn people. I just don't get you. From the opening, I met Daniel Smith 14 years ago when we asked her to consider becoming leader of the Wild Rose Party. She did. But he says more later on in that post that's important. On radio, we did many interviews on the minute aspects of energy policy, from how much propane Quebec got by rail car during the rail strikes to the tolling arrangements on NGTL that bumped gas prices during capacity disruptions, which caused the AECO spot, I don't know what much of this means, to collapse multiple times for multiple years. C69, C48, C48, the Nemeth Report and Allen Inquiry. Brace yourselves, because here it comes. Donald Trump and the U.S. light, tight oil boom. The absurdity of fossil fuel subsidy allegations. All the baloney behind Build Back Better, just transition, and resilient recovery. So, you see, Dave's got some thoughts. Dave also has some of your money, because Dave has been the recipient of multiple sole-sourced contracts awarded to him by Daniel Smith as Premier Alberta, not only to define what Alberta's energy future should look like, but also to describe what the future of the AAR should look like. So, things are great at the AAR. Yup. One of the other areas that we're going to be watching quite closely as we go through the next little bit and this is going to be particularly important with the next legislative session, has to do with changes and, quite frankly, attacks on human rights. Danielle Smith has made it very clear that she's going to be making changes in the upcoming legislative session in regards to the Alberta Bill of Rights, which was last revised in 2000. But let's let Danny explain it.
That amending the Alberta Human Rights Act was the way to be able to protect medical status. Preston Manning had a better idea, though. He looked at the Public Health Act and he found a line in the Public Health Act that says it takes precedence over all other bills, with the exception of the Alberta Bill of Rights. And so the problem is the Alberta Bill of Rights was written in 1972. It was a great piece of legislation. Peter Lougheed first implemented it, but it needs to have a few more protections in there. So while I can't tell you exactly what will be in the legislation until it's tabled, I can tell you this. The amendments will make it illegal for the government to discriminate against anyone who refuses a medical treatment, including refusing a vaccine.
So what she said there was she's going to amend the Human Rights Act in order to change the rules for what you can be discriminated against and what you can be discriminated not against. And she's going to include medical procedures, including vaccines. So it won't be fair. It won't be legal for an employer to say to someone, oh, you have to be vaccinated in order to have this job. We're going to need you to stay current on your vaccinations. That will become illegal in the province of Alberta. It will be illegal for somebody who, I don't know, runs a long-term healthcare facility in the province of Alberta to say, hey, we've got all these like really, really old, really, really vulnerable people hanging out here. We're going to need you to stay up to date on your vaccinations, please. Nope, not allowed. But again, this is another example of Danny's flawed philosophy on how legislation should be introduced. We saw this with the Alberta Sovereignty Act, where she introduced a piece of legislation that said a bunch of, and let me be clear here, batshit crazy things. That legislation, the evolution of that legislation from the very, very beginning to the very, very end was radically different. And the reason why it was radically different is because the first version of it was so terrible. It was so illegal. Period. Well, she said in multiple interviews, well, you know, the way legislation is supposed to work, and this is not how legislation is supposed to work, for the record, but the way that Danny believes legislation is supposed to work is you get an MLA. They come up with this idea. They write it down maybe just on a napkin here, and then they introduce it in the legislature, and then everybody goes, wait, what? You can't do any of that. And then you fix it as you go, you see. It's not like we're playing with laws that are going to have major impacts on anyone's lives. And one of the things that Danielle Smith's UCP has gotten notoriously good at is unintended consequences. They don't think it through because you see, you've just got that one MLA scribbling down his thoughts on a piece of paper. And so all of the side effects aren't considered. And there's a lot of people who have said, this seems like there's a lot of side effects that aren't being considered here because there's these things called community treatment orders. Some of you might remember there was the tragic incident that occurred quite a while ago where an individual suffering from a mental illness suffered a psychotic break on a Greyhound bus. Now, that person was found not guilty by reason of mental defect and has since been working on integrating back into society. And that's good. And probably a lot of people are going to get angry at me for saying that, but they were suffering from a psychotic break secondary to their schizophrenia that wasn't being treated properly. Now, in order for them to get back into society properly, they've had to undergo something called a community treatment order, which means they are required to take their medications. That's part of their release. And community treatment orders are actually really quite common. If somebody has demonstrated that they lack the ability to consistently take their medications and doing so makes themselves a threat to themselves or a threat to others, then a community treatment order can be issued, and that person has to take their meds under supervision. They have to undergo a medical procedure of taking their meds by law. But now all of a sudden, that would be discriminatory. That's just one example. The most obvious example, though, has to be the fact that Danielle Smith has said that in this legislative session, she's going to introduce legislation that addresses what she calls compassionate care, compassionate intervention. It's called forced treatment. And the idea behind it is if somebody is identified that has overdosed too many times, I don't know what that number is. It's incredibly subjective. But if somebody has reached the point where they've become a burden on the healthcare system, then they can just be scooped up and held and forced to undergo treatment for their addiction. The number that's been thrown around is 120 days. That's a third of a year. So we're talking about somebody being held against their will for a third of a year to undergo treatment. And there's some people who are like, oh, it's a great idea. Well, maybe it'll save some lives. And the evidence says no, it won't. Because the reality is only 50% roughly of people who undergo treatment for addiction are able to recover to an abstinence-based lifestyle. The other 50% don't. And when you take a look at what the numbers are for forced treatment, it drops off real fast. And in fact, the risk of death for somebody who has been in a forced treatment program who then comes out of forced treatment is staggeringly higher than somebody who went into treatment of their own will. So not only are we pursuing something that isn't going to work, we're pursuing something that isn't going to work and is unquestionably going to cost lives. In one of our interviews with Guy Felicella, he summed it up incredibly well. Guy said something to the effect of, if I had been forced into treatment when I wasn't ready to go to treatment, the only thing that I would have done is ruined everybody else's chances for treatment because I wouldn't want to be there, so I would have been a dick. Guy's exactly right. Guy's exactly the kind of person, because he's such a success story, that people should be listening to. Because he was able to go through a variety of harm reduction pathways that eventually introduced him to treatment that worked for him. And now he's a speaker and a beacon of hope for people who are trying to find their ways out of addiction stuffs and mental health stuffs. How committed is Danielle Smith to forced treatment? She said exactly how committed she was last weekend.
Is attempting to do is to be a notwithstanding clause on federal law. Because the notwithstanding clause is written in a weird way. The only time you can use the notwithstanding clause is to protect your own legislation. Now, we may have to use it on the Compassionate Care Act, because if we're ordering people into care for 90 to 120 days, the federal or the courts might not like that. That would be the kind of case where we would say, notwithstanding what the court says, we think it's important to order people into care. But I don't have the ability to use the notwithstanding clause to override federal legislation. The federal government has something in the Constitution called disallowance. And what it is that if we tried to pass legislation, like we tried to once to set up our own currency, that is in their area of jurisdiction, they have the ability to disallow it. So what I'm using the Sovereignty Act for is the reverse, is I want to sort of assert that we are going to disallow federal laws that interfere in our jurisdiction. And some of these things might end up in the court.
Okay, so first of all, no, she can't do that. All of the legal experts have said that's not how the Sovereignty Act works. And it's wild because if you actually read what was passed as the Alberta Sovereignty with the United Canada Act, that's not what she described there. So, no, that's not the powers of the Sovereignty Act. And the notwithstanding clause is used when a province is going to violate human rights. That's the whole point of it. Literally. The notwithstanding clause is a clause that works for 5 years that allows a provincial government to say, well, we understand that this is how human rights work in Canada, but we would like to violate those for a period of 5 years, please. After that 5 years, why, we might take a look and re-up it, but we haven't really decided yet. So we'll have to see where we land on that one in 5 years. But for the next 5 years, we will violate the human rights. Thank you very much. And Alberta's done it before. It did it to block gay marriage. So that's super cool. The fact that Danielle Smith acknowledges that she would have to use the notwithstanding clause to force people into treatment against their will has this country learned nothing. The fact that she is willing to admit that on a public stage means that she knows she's bringing forward legislation that's going to violate people's charter rights. And where this gets so wild to me is this is a premier, her road to power by saying, oh, freedom, we got to have the freedom, got to protect the freedom, the charter. Oh, I love the charter so much. Got to protect the charter. Unless it's really inconvenient. And then we'll use the one legal loophole that exists to violate somebody's charter rights. It is stunning to me that she can hold those two thoughts in her head. And what is even more stunning to me is that she is going to be able to get all of her supersized cabinet and all of her caucus to vote with her to suspend people's charter rights. It's going to go to court. Multiple groups have already said they're going to take it to court as soon as she tries to go there. But that is the goal of the Conservative government in the province of Alberta, to suspend people's charter rights. Danielle Smith. And on that note, that brings us to our last topic. Because if we're going to talk about human rights in the province of Alberta, we have to recognize that it's not just addicts whose charter rights and human rights Danielle Smith is looking to violate. As we saw at the beginning of this year, when Danielle Smith released her timeshare from hell video announcing her new anti-trans, anti-medical choice, anti-parental choice policies, there are other areas that are under attack, whose human rights are going to be potentially violated. We had a conversation with, I keep just wanting to default to Carla Marx, so I'm going to allow myself. We had a conversation with Carla Marx for our last episode, and she was very clear. And I agree with her 100%. Victoria Buchholz, per doctor. Any violation of anyone's human rights is a violation of all of our human rights. And the fact that Danielle Smith is openly and willingly going to insert herself into doctors' offices across the province and dictate, not based on medicine, not based on facts, not based on anything that's literally actually happening. Well, did she say that it's not that it's based on anything that's actually not happening? Yeah, she did. She said Alberta's gender identity policies are based on a concern about what will or could happen. That's literally what Danielle Smith said. That's what she said. She said Alberta's gender identity policies are based on a concern about what will happen. So it's not even legislation to solve an existing problem. It's legislation based on speculative fear. And let's be super clear here. It is legislation that removes people's human rights based on speculative fear, period, end of sentence. And it's poorly thought out and poorly executed. One of the pieces, and this is where we go back to our first topic of education, one of the pieces that exists in this is that if a kid at school decides that they want to use a different name or a different pronoun, the parents must immediately be notified. And this is, again, we're going to go ahead and get up on my soapbox because this one drives me absolutely crazy. As a parent, it is your job. It is your number one job to make sure that your kids are healthy and happy and they know that they're safe. If you have done those things, if you have a good relationship with your child, if you have trust with your child, then when they're dealing with major issues like the kinds of issues that come up with gender dysphoria, they'll talk to you. And if they don't, having somebody that they can talk to first who's in a trusted position in confidence is not a bad thing. We trust teachers to take care of our kids, to keep our kids safe, to teach them for hours a day for roughly 10 months out of the year. Teachers are so overwhelmed, as has been said many times on the program, by actual teachers. They're so overwhelmed. They do not have, even if they had the inclination, they don't have the time or the resources to turn a kid gay or trans, which is not even a thing. So it's not unreasonable to say, hey, if my kid falls on a playground, you're the one who's going to make sure that they get the appropriate medical care. You're the one who's going to make sure that 911 is called. You're the one who's going to make sure that the paramedics show up. If my kid is having problems in school, I trust you to be the one who's going to talk to me about it. I trust you to judge what problems need to be brought to my attention and what problems can maybe just be dealt with in the classroom. And the reality is, trans kids are disproportionately at risk for abuse. So if a trans kid isn't comfortable having that conversation with their parents, putting that responsibility on a teacher is completely unreasonable. Even if you want to get past it creates a lot of extra work, which it does. Every single time a kid wants to change the pronoun, every time a kid wants to change their name, and we don't even know what that means. My full name is Nathaniel. I go by Nate. Do my parents need a phone call? Did my parents need a phone call when I was going to school? Obviously, that's ridiculous. So what variation, what gradient is required here? But the other thing that is not being thought about is that if that kid is an at-risk kid, and that kid goes to their teacher and says, hey, Mr. Smith, probably not the best last name to choose in this example, but hey, Mr. Smith, I'm dealing with some stuff, and I would really like in the classroom if you could refer to me this way using this name going forward. Daniel Smith is creating a mechanism where that teacher then has the legal responsibility to notify the parents, even if that teacher isn't sure that that's the best thing in that situation. So not only is Danielle Smith loading a gun, putting it in the teacher's hand, but she's pointing it at the kid's head and forcing the teacher to pull the trigger. And if you think that language is hyperbolic, then I would challenge you to spend a couple of minutes looking up what the stats are for suicide for trans youth. Because that's literally one of the outcomes that is a very real possibility with this suite of policies. Now, Danielle Smith is also inserting herself into medical offices by saying, you know what? I don't think kids under the age of 16 should be getting puberty blockers. And we had a conversation with a physician who provides gender-affirming care. And that physician, go back and listen to that episode too. We have a wonderful back catalog. You really should check it out. But that physician was very clear. The whole point of puberty blockers is to block puberty so that if that kid, when they grow into an adult, decides that they want to go with gender-affirming surgery, the surgery is less invasive. It's less traumatic. And perhaps most importantly, if you get a kid who has identified as trans and has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and has the appropriate medical care, if you get that kid on puberty blockers, it's going to be that much easier for them to present as their true gender, their authentic gender down the road. But Danielle Smith has said no. No more puberty blockers. I'm not a medical physician. I'm not a specialist in trans care, but I'm just going to decide this is what we're going to do. I certainly didn't campaign on it, but I'm still going to do it. She's also introducing herself into the world of sports and dictating who can play sports with whom, not as kids, but as adults. And if you thought the Danielle Smith overriding people's charter rights to force them into treatment was bad, you need to think about the fact that, again, this is a premier who rode into power saying that the government had no business in the medical offices of physicians. If a doctor believes that somebody isn't safe to get a vaccine, they shouldn't get a vaccine. That was one of her arguments. Government shouldn't be forcing people to get vaccines. But the government, under Danielle Smith, is going to force people, take away their choice to decide who they're going to play sports with. She's going to insert herself into all of those medical doctors' offices. And if you think that, oh, well, Danielle Smith, she's operating on evidence, I got a couple of things that I want to read to you. Because this is a small sampling of the groups that have condemned these policies and have said they are going to cause harm. We are talking about the Alberta Human Rights Commission, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the University of Calgary and University of Alberta law faculties, the Canadian Pediatric Society, the Canadian Psychological Association, Children's Healthcare Canada and the Pediatric Chairs of Canada, the Canadian Medical Association, the Alberta Medical Association, Alberta Psychiatric Association, Office of the Child and Youth Advocate of Alberta, Social Workers Association of Alberta, United Nurses of Alberta, Alberta Teachers Association, and Alberta School Councils Association. All of the major groups that are stakeholders in this conversation are saying, you're about to do a big thing really, really badly, and it's going to kill some kids. The medical experts, and we're going to go even a little bit farther because there's medical associations that are directly condemning this as well. These are medical associations against Smith's policies. The Alberta Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Association, Doctors of British Columbia, Doctors of Manitoba, Doctors of Nova Scotia, the Federation de Médecins Omnipraticiens du Quebec. I'm sorry, I'm so Anglophone. The Medical Society of Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick Medical Society, Newfoundland and Labrador Medical Society, the Northwest Territories Medical Association, the Ontario Medical Association, the Saskatchewan Medical Association, and the Yukon Medical Association. All of these organizations have come out and said, these policies are bad. Do not do them. Danielle Smith's response is, we'll do robust consultation. But as our FOIP yielded, and again, go listen to that conversation with Dr. Buchholz. They didn't consult on whether or not the policy should be a thing. They only consulted on how to implement the policies and how to catch people who tried to avoid them. There was no meaningful consultation on the development of these policies with any of these organizations. None of the medical experts were involved in forming these policies. None of the medical experts, none of the psychiatric experts, none of the teaching experts were involved in the formation and the creation of these policies. This appears to be the whim of Danielle Smith, or who knows who else, because she refuses to publicly say who was involved in the development of these policies. But no expert groups have stepped forward. And as I said going into this segment, we need to start taking the notion seriously that an attack on one group's human rights is an attack on all of our human rights. It should be unacceptable in 2024 in Alberta, in Canada, that a government would say, we are going to revoke people's rights. We are going to violate people's human rights. We are going to violate people's charter rights. We are going to do all of this. It should be unthinkable that this is what's happening in the province and the country that we live in, but it absolutely is. And we're going to keep paying attention to it. And we're going to keep trying to be loud about it. And we're going to keep trying to let the people who are the targets of these horrible policies that they are not alone. And the humble ask that everybody at the show would like to put forward to all of our audience tonight is you should be doing the same. Because people are under attack. And this is happening in Alberta, in Canada, in 2024. And it's time that we start doing a better job of standing with and standing beside the people who have become the easy targets of cowards who only know how to punch down, who only know how to bully and victimize instead of inspiring with real leadership. That's what we got for our program for tonight. Hey, everybody, aren't you glad we came back with a live show? So I'm going to do the plugs, the obligatory plug things, and then we will open it up to if anybody wants to weigh in on the Twitter Spaces. You can go to the Twitter Spaces and do the little raisey handy icon, and we'll go from there. And yes, before we get to there is the other big story. We talked about it before. We've handed off all of our stuff. The Skybox scandal. We're going to do our very best not to talk about it in the hopes of not ruining things for reporters. But I'm going to reiterate the commitment that I made when I first brought this up. This situation with the Skybox thing and the corruption that is going on around it and has enabled it and has let it propagate in the way that it has is so much worse than what's been publicly reported. We really hope that we see the depth and breadth of how bad the corruption in the Smith government is, how compromised the Smith government is. We really hope that we see a news story come out about that in the coming weeks. But if we don't, we're going to bring everything that we have to bear. So, all of that being said, if you like the kind of content that we're producing, it was such an uplifting show tonight. We really were just all of the positive. Then you can sign up to be one of our supporters at our Patreon website at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce the kind of content that we do. We have a couple other FOIPs that we're looking forward to filing in the coming days and weeks. So you can do that. But if you're somebody who doesn't like the Patreon, or maybe you can't do the monthly thing, commitment, it's so hard, especially this day and age. Then we also have the option where we have set up e-transfers, so you can e-transfer us at info@thebreakdownab.ca. And we'll just say thank you very much. That's those are the two big plugs. But I also got to plug the merch, and we're going to have a direct link to the merch in our show notes description because they got moved around a little bit and the page is a little bit hard to find. But we do have the hoodies for the fall. The fall is coming. If you've been outside at like 9 o'clock at night in the province of Alberta lately, you might have noticed a crisp chill in the air. The perfect thing to combat that would be a hoodie, or perhaps a hot, warm cup of your favorite heated beverage. We do, of course, always have our T-shirts as well. There's a lot to unpack here, and the tagline from the end of the show. And then we also have the toques, the beaties. All of these you can get at abpoly.ca. .ca. And if you're having a hard time finding it on the actual website, that's okay, because we had a little bit of trouble finding it too initially. But we're putting the links directly in the show notes now. So click on the link, buy yourself a little treat, nice toasty little treat there. And yeah, I think that rounds up the obligatory things. So with that said, we do have somebody in the queue who wants to be a speaker tonight. She's been a speaker many times on the show before. We're going to bring in Cassandra. Cassandra, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nate. How are you?
Well, it's good to be back.
I'm so happy you're back. I actually was driving somewhere and then I saw the notification pop up. I'm like, oh no, they're back. I got to rush home.
Yeah, we're back.
But
We had our little summer break-ish. We peppered in some episodes and tried some new things in between there. We're going to keep trying a couple of new things, but we're back.
right on. So I think I did a bit of a tweet. It wasn't fully explanatory, but last week, a young friend of mine who has some she has multiple, she's one of those complex cases you were talking about, uh heart condition since birth, um pretty serious liver condition, um has had broken her back at 16. She's had she has multiple things going on, like it's a lot of things. And she was feeling ill, and she was not wanting to go to the, it wasn't feeling very good. She has to go to Foothills because of her heart condition. And so I said, well, we could go to the urgent care in Cochrane. It'll be much quicker. You can at least get the blood tests. She was worried about infection. Um, and then if they feel that you need further care, they can often fast track you because they can call ahead and, kind of streamline you into the system, which is the way it used to work. And Cochrane was amazing. They did a bunch of blood tests and they said, look, we're going to forward. We really think you need a CT scan and we think you need an ultrasound. We can't do that here. So we're going to order it over at Foothills, and you need to just go straight there. The doctor's been notified. So this was supposed to be ordered when we got there. When we got there, it was not ordered. We had some paperwork that we were told to bring with us and give to them. Um, Nobody seemed to want to take the paperwork. We were told to give it to the doctors. They were like, "Oh, we've already got everything." It was very confusing. Um, they did not, or the things that we were told were going to be ordered because they had spoken to a doctor that was supposed to be waiting for us were not. We waited, oh, I don't know, 7, 8 hours before finally they put her in a bed. Once she was in the bed, I mean, I want to say that the doctor and the nurses and attendants were absolutely wonderful at this point. She was in um, pretty much is what, if you've ever been to Foothills, is the main section. If you go in there where you normally will be put into a bed before they decide to move you somewhere else, if need be. And so we spent most of the time in there, and at every point we were told it was only going to be a couple hours, and it was not a couple hours. Um, they, pretty much they did the ultrasound and everything, and we had to wait back for some more tests, and we were waiting for the CT. And what we found out after several hours of after she had a bed, they still had not ordered um, the CT. We were understood that it was busy and it was going to be a wait, but they hadn't even ordered it. And then they finally did order it. It was, I don't know, it was after midnight by this point. We had been at this since 2 in the afternoon. And when they did order it, I mean, yeah, I mean, again, there was another lovely nurse that I've actually encountered there myself before that's often given me IVs and stuff. And she gave my friend the IV, and she was lovely. And then she's like, okay, we're going to roll you down to the CT. And so we're thinking, okay, finally, we're going into the CT. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, she asked, well, can my friend stay here? Because, oh, no, we're moving you to a different section of the hospital. And we're like, oh, why are you moving us to a different section of the hospital? And she's like, oh, well, because we don't have any staff and we have to close that section down. And we're like, oh, like they literally had no staff to run it and had to close that section down. And then they rolled us into the recliner section. And we're now they're the most uncomfortable recliners I've ever seen. I was
You have to be
trying to
able to
sit
clean
in
them.
this horrible chair with my bad back. I think I've mentioned multiple times about my cervical spine, and
Yeah.
I'm only a couple millimeters from being a quadriplegic and stuff. But it, anyway, we waited there in that section. I have to say, I was kind of disappointed because the staff were not as nice. They were quite unpleasant. I get people are probably burnt out and overworked. And that probably has something to do with it. But anyway, the CT still didn't happen. I had to ask them. I said, well, we were told we were being taken to she was being taken to a CT right away. And now we're here and we don't really understand what's going on. And so they explained what was going on, and it was several more hours. Like it was about 5 a.m. I was like, I can't keep my eyes open any longer. I said to him, my friend was sleeping. They also, a nurse did not follow the instructions, the doctor, because she was getting anxious. She's hard to put an IV in because of things that happened during her heart surgery. And so it's hard for them. And she was anxious. So they ordered Ativan for under the tongue.
Yep.
And the nurse came along and instead put it in an IV. She said she was only going to give her a tiny bit. She gave her half the syringe, and it was just supposed to be a little bit to calm her down, and she was out of it. Like by the time we got to that other section, she literally passed out in that chair, curled up in the most uncomfortable position like a cat. I had a hard time. I was trying to adjust her and adjust the chair for her. Nobody would help us in the recliner section. They could see me trying to navigate, trying to get her comfortable in the chair so she wasn't in the position she was. I managed to get the seat up. Like I said, nobody came to help. But at about 5:30 a.m., I was like, look, just tell her I'm going to be, waiting in my car. I'm going to see if I can close my eyes for a little bit so I'm able to drive once she's ready to go. Because I didn't feel at that point that I was able to drive. And that was our experience. The resident and the doctor, the resident did come in, and when he discovered that she was not given the Ativan under the tongue and what they had done, he was actually quite upset because that was not what was ordered, and was going to talk to the doctor about it. Because even he was like alarmed at that. And it seemed to be a mistaken understanding of why, even though it was written on the chart of why the Ativan was being given, it seemed to be thought for a different reason. And if she had looked at the chart, she would have seen, but she didn't do that. And anyway, we eventually did. I think we got out of there by 7:45 a.m. was when we finally got out of there after she received the CT scan. They let her sleep long after the results were back, and didn't really notify me like they said they would. But that's just the summation. I've been to Foothills myself many times, and it is typically a long wait. But honestly, what I saw going on there, not just with our experience, but just what was going on around me as well with other people. it was sobering and upsetting to see that like I can literally remember the last time I was at the Foothills ER, and it was just sad, and I just wanted to relay that story because this is not the way our healthcare is supposed to run. It's not the way I've ever seen it run, and yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And I think that it's, I love the fact that you highlighted that the people that there's so many of the people that you interacted with there were very clearly trying to do their level best. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost when people share these stories. Because there's that, as human beings, we have that immediate inclination to try to lay blame. We try to say, oh, it was this person's fault too. They did X, Y, Z wrong. But I think that it's really, really important to recognize that this is a systemic failure. And unfortunately, one of the things that has been allowed to happen with healthcare is that the environment has gotten so bad in so many different ways, in so many different parts of healthcare. The people are so burnt out. Nobody gets into healthcare because they want to be mean to people. I mean,
No.
there's lots of jobs where you can do that and get paid more.
Well,
But
no, and I mean, I'm not going to say like they're all human beings, and the majority of them are good and are trying their best.
yeah, and the point that I'm trying to get
Yeah.
at is I think that it is well established that there are environments that you can create that will minimize mistakes, that will minimize people falling through the cracks, and
Absolutely.
there are environments that you can create where people will fall through the cracks and mistakes will get made because people are tired, people are burnt out, people are all the things. And so I think that that's just sort of one of the little bow I wanted to try to put on that, because
No, you're right. I like that's what I was trying to, that's why I said like I wanted to say that it wasn't that the staff weren't wonderful, but you could see the different levels of burnout, like even from one department to the next. When we were being shoved, it like there was different things going on, and like I said, I even witnessed some things that I don't feel comfortable that were going on around with other people that made me uncomfortable. And I think it's important that we realize like this is what they're doing with everything that you talked about, and even like the way they're redirecting our healthcare dollars, the way they're um opening up these for-profit clinics. And I lost my doctor. It was during COVID. I lost my doctor. Kenny was still in, and I had a great doctor, and I lost him to private healthcare. He had an autistic son, and his wife had done the majority of taking care of them, and he needed better hours. But one of the conversations that he had with me, and it was a private. He called me from his personal phone from his house after he had to move to this clinic and was only able to do 1 day a week to maintain his client roster at the old clinic. Um, and what he said, and he was almost in tears, and he was like, "Cassandra, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He goes, "They lied to us." And he was talking about the UCP. He goes, "They lied to us. They said they were going to give us a better deal if we voted for them." That was under Kenny. And he felt remorse because he had made a decision that not only affected his life but affected the lives of his patients. He was a very caring doctor. Everybody loved him, and he was very good at what he did. And he felt like he was duped into making a decision, like that he, if had he known all the facts, would not have made. And the healthcare system, the state of the healthcare system at that time was nowhere near what it is now.
yeah.
And that's, yeah.
Well,
So
thank you for sharing that story.
no problem. And you have a wonderful night.
I will. I'll do my best. I'm probably going to bed as soon as the show's done because I am old.
Right on.
Hey, chat. I see you over there. I see that there's a little sub conversation going on, and we got a bunch of DMs about this. So maybe I'll wrap up on this little note because we don't have any other speakers in the queue tonight, so that's okay. So let's have a little fun. Let's maybe weigh into this just a little bit. It's no secret there was a little bit of tension that went on between the breakdown and Mr. Ryan Jesperson. He had some factual missteps that he made on one of his programs. Some of you might remember the Danielle Smith press conference immediately after the Jasper fires, where she had her emotional moment. And there were a lot of people who looked at it and went, "Oh, I'm not sure that's sincere." And you can debate that either way. I mean, there's certainly anecdotal evidence that suggests that this is a go-to maneuver for Danielle Smith, because she has used this exact same "I'm so emotionally moved" approach before. She used it during the E. coli outbreak, which we did a little bit on. You can see that on our timeline with the teleprompter. The teleprompter's not real. That's a bit, just to be clear. But she has, on many occasions, showed significant emotion. And in a follow-up interview with Mr. Jesperson, Mr. Jesperson did quite a little rant on how he's known Danielle Smith for many, many years, and never, not once, has he seen her choke up on this, and or like that. And we went back into the archives and we found the commentary that he and now Senator, oh, I bet you Erica Baruttis is just so angry, Charles Adler had about the E. coli situation and Danielle Smith's response at the time. So there's no question that Mr. Jesperson was not being factually accurate when he said he'd never seen Danielle Smith like this. Everybody should really take in the enormity of the moment. And we tried in our own little trademark way to say, hey, what you're saying contradicts what you've said. Oh, good point about the censorship. I'll come to that in a sec. But what you're saying contradicts things that you've said before. Maybe you could walk that back. And he did. He did not. He did not like our remix of the Real Talk opening theme, which is fine. That's okay. We do jokes. We're not everybody's cup of tea. But I wanted to address some of the discussion that was going on in the comments there, because, well, apparently Mr. Jesperson and the Real Talk Twitter account did not appreciate our humor to the tune of they unfollowed us. They don't like us anymore. We are continuing to follow both Mr. Jesperson and Real Talk. And I'd like to talk about why for a second. And I mentioned this before on the show. And I think it's important because we are not a corporate media entity. We're we're registered as a company, but we're not. One of the founding principles of the breakdown is that we have to be able to speak truth to power to everyone, and we will burn whatever bridges we need to do in order to maintain that. If that means losing money, oh well, we lose money. Everybody who's involved with the breakdown does so on a volunteer basis. Our funds cover our bills and the toys to make the things go, but nobody, and we don't want anybody to, is relying on the breakdown to make ends meet. And that's a really important thing to clarify, because Mr. Jesperson, he's probably got a couple of speaking gigs. He's probably got some things that he says and does on the side. I mean, I know he's got his nice little media empire, and he's running that discourse podcast with Baruttis. So he's building a network, and good for him. But he and the people he employs do rely on him being able to get guests, get access. And there's no question that his advertising dollars are dictated in no small part by his metrics. the number of views that he gets. There's also no question that when he gets Danielle Smith on the show, he gets more views because she's the premier of Alberta and she says batshit crazy things. And that's why we're continuing to follow him, and we'll continue to follow his program, because he is very good at making sure that he's able to maintain relationships with all of his guests on both sides of the political spectrum, whether you like it or not. And we're able to pull those clips and then do our well-informed commentary and occasionally make jokes. It's unfortunate that Mr. Jesperson and co are so thin-skinned that they're not able to follow the breakdown anymore because we made fun of them with an M&M joke. But that's okay, because we're absolutely not everybody's cup of tea. We're not trying to be everybody's cup of tea. But the media pundit thing that Mr. Jesperson does is tricky, and he does a lot of shows. It's quite possible that he could have forgotten that he had said and done commentary on Danielle Smith's previous exact same emotional moment. The only thing, and I'll speak for myself, I'm not going to speak for the show at this point. The only thing that I'm a little disappointed in is that when shown the video saying, "Hey, Ryan, you actually did talk about exactly this before," he didn't just say, he didn't have to say it on the show. He could have just said, like, yeah, it's been a rough time. Because Mr. Jesperson has been very public about the fact that he's had a really rough year. And so, as much as I believe it's absolutely critical to hold people to account, and I want to be very, very clear with all of our listeners and all of our audience, if we ever make a mistake, or if we ever make a claim that's demonstrably false, please, 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 please let us know, because we would rather be right than look right, if that makes any sense. So we're going to keep following him, and we'll keep ripping his video when he has guests on like Danielle Smith, because it's been like 7 months and we still haven't gotten a response to our multiple interview requests. We're not going to ever get her. That's okay. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's in the chat. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who is supporting the show and who's listening to the show. We have been experimenting with some things over the last little while, and it's been obviously a little complex at times, but we're having fun. We're going to keep experimenting because we're trying to find as many ways as we can to be loud and let people know that people are there, and to try to make sure that people know what's actually going on. Here's the wild thing. We didn't even cue this clip up. I was going to have this clip queued up. We didn't do this. In one of the town halls that Danielle Smith did over the last little while, she was asked by one of the people at the town hall, "Hey, Danny, how do we know what the truth is? Where should we go to get the truth?" That's probably why I didn't cue up the video, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get through it without laughing. And without a word of a lie, the media sources that Danielle Smith cited were True North, the Western Standard, the Rebel, Aaron Gunn, and I'm sorry, and the Counter Signal. Jespo didn't even make the list, so do with that what you will. But as long as there is a far-right ecosystem, media ecosystem that is out there, it's going to be really important that there's little folks like us that are trying to say, like, hey, I think that you're lying, and that's not great. Please don't do that. So we're going to keep doing that. I don't know if we're going to have an interview episode this week. We have a couple of things lined up, but we have to clear some things with legal. So that's new for us. There's one conversation that we're trying to bring you that is going to be, let's go with disruptive, for a whole list of reasons. So we're trying to make sure that we dot our T's and cross our I's properly on that one. We'll bring that one to you when we can, but we will be back next Sunday, 8:00, for another live episode of The Breakdown. In the meantime and in between time, like and share, smash that subscribe button, as the kids say. And I want to say, I'm not going to use the name because I don't have permission, but we've got somebody who's volunteering to pull clips out and post them on the YouTube shorts for us because I'm not good at that. And this person has been the main reason, if not the only reason, why we've been able to put some YouTube shorts out there. So I want to say a big thank you to them. You know who you are. And a big thank you to everybody who volunteers and helps make this show a show. And obviously, of course, it wouldn't be a show without the audience. It would just be me yelling into the void. And I know it's not that because of all you wonderful people. So thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. If you're listening to the podcast version, leave us a rating. We've had a couple people who very much didn't like us lately, so they left some strongly worded reviews. And here's the takeaway before I wrap things up, because I'm being long-winded tonight. I don't know why. So out of character. It is starting next weekend. It's going to be Pride Weekend in Calgary. And as I spent a great deal of time talking about on the show tonight, there's some folks that are being targeted. And like I said before, the attack an attack on human rights on any group is an attack on human rights on everyone. And so we need to make sure that we're letting people know that we stand with them, we stand beside them, and they are not fighting this alone. So there's the thing. Find somebody this week to tell that to, who's maybe feeling a little bit alone, and let them know that they're not. And with that, thanks again, everybody. See you next week. Keep the conversation going.